The primal question is really a question that gets imprinted in us in our early childhood, and it really represents a need that went unmet or that was confusing about how to actually meet that need. But the problem here, Scott, with all of us is that your relationships are defined by it, your work is defined by it, your identity is defined by it. If we don't understand that driver or that question and how it's influencing our lives, we're living at a massive disadvantage.
Thanks for having the time for the show today, Mike.
Thanks, Scott. I'm looking forward to our conversation today.
I was reading about the 7 primal questions, and I was also listening to a couple podcasts that you did, and you were having a conversation with someone about their need to be successful and where it comes from. And they kind of self-identified that a lot of their success probably came from their father's feeling of wins and losses when they were in the car from T-ball or one of those things. And it kind of hit close to home because it made me think of why I developed the high performance life quadrants and the 4 components, because it gave me something outside of that. But can you talk a little bit to our listeners about maybe what are people most interested in today when you're talking to them as this Mr. Rogers, nice, easy to talk to personal development human? What are they wanting to talk about more and more? And is it still this trauma to success mentality, or is there something different that is kind of resonating with people?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think there's a lot of interesting conversations happening around high performance, growth, transformation, all of it. And it's really an exciting time to be doing this type of work. One of the things I think the 7 primal questions and the Primal Question Framework speaks to a lot in terms of the need in this conversation is the need for simplicity. I think a lot of us, especially high performers, are not interested in anything complex, anything that's going to take a long time, anything that possibly won't produce results from the investment. And so one of the things, and I feel that very strongly in my own work, in my own journey of growth, it's like, I ain't got time for stuff that isn't going to work. And I ain't got time for stuff that's going to add a burden or extra complexity to my life. And so
Truth.
one of the things that I just think is so important in all of this, and hopefully in this conversation that we have, we'll see that something can be simple and straightforward, but incredibly powerful. I think about like a hammer. A hammer is a pretty simple tool, but man, it can certainly do a lot. Okay. And it can certainly produce a lot. And I think in terms of the primal questions, it's a very simple concept. There's nothing overly complicated about it, but it has a lot of horsepower to create massive change in our lives, in our relationships, in our marriages, in our relationship to success, and really giving us a better understanding of ourselves.
My college roommate, when we got into our room, I had one of those bunk beds, those lofts, and we had put it together, and it wasn't put together very well. And my roommate's dad came in, and I said, "I think we need some help. This thing just isn't working." And he asked for the persuader, and that's what he called the hammer. So it was his tool, and he just started hammering on the loft trying to get it back. But I'll never forget his analogy of the hammer was, I was like, "What's the persuader?" And it was the hammer. So great point.
Can be used for a lot of different things, and even ways that we don't even think it should be applied, it can be applied.
100%. He was very aggressive with that hammer, but it did work, and it lasted me through the 4 years of college, or through at least the year of college that I was there in that loft.
Love it.
It was not very sturdy, but it did work. Mike, what led you to this? Like, how did you get into this space? What was the journey like for you to develop this system?
Yeah, I've been doing this type of work, Scott, for 20 plus years now, of just helping people figure out their lives. And kind of my focus is what I would call heart-centered high performance. I really believe that, I'm a big believer in growth. I want to see it in my own life. I'll spend thousands and thousands of dollars this year in coaching for me and my own development. And so, I'm definitely smoking what I'm selling here in terms of, I want to help people grow, but I'm also interested in doing it in my own life. But I think the thing that's so exciting about this work is I really believe in just human potential. And most of us, because of these scripts or narratives or stories that we've been told or believe about ourselves, are putting unnecessary blocks on our lives. And this isn't just sort of like inspirational or just like a magnet that I'm going to put on my refrigerator to encourage me. This is really about like the stewardship of our lives, and it's this opportunity to really show up and deliver value, and not in the sense of to be judged or to make money or to be esteemed by your peers, but it's like the chance to create value, whether it be in my neighborhood or in my family or with my kids or in a little league team or at work or with wherever it might be, is such an exciting proposition. And I fundamentally think like that's why we're here as human beings. It's not just to be takers. And there's nothing worse than personal development that is all about you. Okay. There's nothing like that's, ugh. And unfortunately, I think a lot of, uh, you know, self growth, growing, ourselves, therapy. Sometimes it's just all about me
Ego.
and me
Yeah.
understand myself. Really interested in, yes, you understanding yourself, but now what are you going to do with that to better the world and improve the things around you? And so I love watching that when people kind of have the light bulb come on for them about their blocks, their limiting beliefs, their narratives, old stories, trauma, how it's been negatively influencing their life, moving that out of the way, and then being released into the world to do good. There's nothing better than to sit on the sidelines and watch that.
Yeah. It's funny. I often talk about the fact that when I shifted my mindset from taking to giving, everything changed in my life.
Mhm.
And part of that was just in a professional perspective. When you grow up and you feel like you have to prove yourself and you're building something and you're kind of starting from scratch. You're going out into your first job. There's so much pressure to be successful in my brain that I was constantly looking for opportunities about me and myself. And what I learned so quickly, and it didn't take long, thank God, but when I stopped punching my way up at the world and started just standing up and giving of myself what I had to give, my whole life changed. The people that
Yeah.
I was surrounded, the who's in my life, the people that were surrounding me, and we were making each other better. It wasn't just one way, it was all of us helping each other. It was literally lifting people up along the way and then watching them be stewards to you and for your future. And it's such a powerful lesson. And then the only other point I would make on a comment you made is that the worst is when people think that personal development is so primally theirs. Like it's only about them. It's like getting a personality assessment and then walking around and telling everyone, see, this is the way that I am. And this is why I'm like that. No, the personality assessment should actually show you how you can better interact with others, how you can
Yeah.
listen better, what your blind spots might be. And I was in a an event one time. I won't even say where. It was a personal development thing and a growth thing. And I was in a room and a guy says to the room, it was a smaller group, and he says, I'm on this personal journey and my wife just doesn't want to grow. And I don't understand it. It's driving me absolutely crazy. And I just don't know what kind of future we have. And the trainer in front of the room, who had just recently left his wife and was dating a much younger girl, says, I found myself in the same exact position. He started with, I found myself in the same exact position. And he starts like defining that these two were actually both right. And I raised my hand in this room and I said, guys, I don't know what world we're living in right now, but can I ask you how long your personal journey has been? And he goes, well, I just started in the last year and a half. And I said, how long you been married? It's like 20 years. And I said, buddy, I don't know. I'm not the teacher here, but I have to tell you, let your wife come around to personal growth on her own journey. And you know what? Maybe she doesn't have to grow as much as you do. And everybody kind of
Mm.
started laughing and the room got easy. And he came up to me afterwards. He goes, thank you for that. I was really worried, and I said, "Buddy, you were leaning towards a path where you're ready to get rid of a 20-year marriage because you decided to read a John Maxwell book or something like that. That can't be the path that we go on here."
Well, yeah, and I think it just speaks to our own denial that we often live in our lives, our own sort of justifications for our choices and behaviors. And we have, I always say, like, personal development and doing this work and really understanding your primal question, how it drives your life. It's an opportunity to say, I'm on to me. Okay. Like, I actually know what I'm doing here. As I'm talking about how my wife needs to grow or whatever that narrative is, it's like, oh, I see what's going on here. It's actually about me. It's about my need that I'm trying to get met, has nothing to do with her. And I think anytime we can use any sort of complaint or any sort of negativity in our lives to actually step back and say, what is the opportunity here for growth, not for other people, but for me? That to me is like a leader who is going to thrive in their lives. That is an individual who's going to reach new levels of success. But this sort of, we have so many blind spots, Scott, including myself, and there's so many things that just make sense in my world because I'm the one telling myself that, and that's just a very dangerous place to be. And so this is why we do this work. This is why we have these conversations about kind of the core drivers of our life, understanding what is the need that we have that is asking for us to pay attention to it and start paying attention to it, start working on it. But the solution is never external, it's always internal.
Yeah, it's funny how we have to separate from ourselves and kind of look at ourselves from the outside in with this self-awareness. I feel like sometimes as we get older, we're able to step away. I know I am. I'm able to step away from the decision or the reaction, and not always, by the way, but where I actually almost remove myself from it and say, "Hey, you've got to respond in a different way." And it may not be as fast as I want. It may not be exact, but it's a science of learning. It's growing. It's that awareness that comes in that we start to pay attention to. And but I think self awareness is something that I don't know that it's taught very often. And today, in the day and age of social media, for example, so much of how people see themselves are in the eyes of others. It's how they present themselves. The kids want to have the
Mhm.
perfect post. They want to have, I'm in Chicago right now, and I could show you the cool room or the perfect picture or whatever. But the reality is none of that matters. What matters is how I feel. Am I having a great time? How are
Mhm.
the people that I'm with? What is the experience we're having? Are we going to leave and have good stories? But so much of today's pressure in social media is a challenge. How do you see that with your work? How do you see social media playing a factor of maybe how individuals can step outside themselves, become a little more mentally aware, self-aware, and guide themselves towards a better path versus the comparison culture, if you will?
Yeah, well, I think social media actually brings a really uh, interesting tie-in to what happens when we're not self-aware. Because I don't know if you're like me, Scott. I could hop onto Instagram, and then all of a sudden 45 minutes later I've just watched all kinds of Pomeranian videos and behind the scenes at an Adele concert, and I'm like, what just happened to this past 45 minutes? How did I get here? Right. So there's that part of, like, I think a lot of us live our lives that way. We're just sort of unconsciously diving into something that we have no idea, like 45 minutes later, how we got here or even why we stayed so long. Okay, so there's that part of it. And then I think there's also the social media. The more practical thing is, I think social media is just an opportunity for us to be in constant comparison with other things or other people. And I actually don't think that produces positive things for your growth or my growth. Uh, it, the sort of lever of comparison can sort of be effective in a to a level and to a certain point, but I've never seen comparison create transformation. I've seen, me actually doing the inner work, me getting honest with myself, me taking ownership of my life, me having wise mentors come alongside and challenge me. I've seen that produce transformation, but never through just straight up deluge of comparing myself to other people.
Yeah,
That's a recipe for disaster.
as a high performer, I think one of the most disappointing things that happens to ourselves, speaking from the same level of experience, is when I waste time. In fact, if you were to ask me why I use my phone or why I'm on my phone a lot, it's literally it starts in a way where I'm being productive. I'm looking
Mhm.
something up, I'm trying
Right.
to read an article, and all of a sudden I'm down the for me it's the Hungarian Vizslas. I'm looking at Vizsla pictures, I'm sending my wife one, and then I'm watching soccer games from the night before, and then I'm sending my son like a I mean, it's just it is unreal how quickly something that starts as a productive action can turn into complete lack of productivity. And then on top of that, it almost feels like it's the new smoke break. Like we're all just living our lives to take the next smoke break where we get on our phones and separate from our actual real life that's better than the one that we're looking at in our phone. But the reality is it's wasting our time and hurting our health. Neither
Yes.
are good for you, smoking nor this phone. And yet I find myself doing the exact same thing, and I know better. We all know better, but it becomes almost a trap that you get into. I don't know what the what you described as the solution is action and
Mhm.
doing the action of being around people that are making you better, not just looking at them and watching them on TV, but actually putting yourself out there, going to some of these events where you're challenged or you're teaching or you're learning. But I do feel, I just want to reiterate, I do the same things.
Well, yeah, we all do because it is so seductive and ever present and easy. But if we're talking about high performance here, we realize that we actually do have to make some decisions around things that are creating avenues into or getting us onto roads where we don't want to go. Like I actually don't want to increase the noise in my life. Social media increases the noise. Like there's a point to where good leadership, wisdom, it actually requires us to eliminate noise and to get quieter, not noisier. So, like, I look at that and go, well, do I want a noisier life or do I want a quieter life so I can do the deeper work? The comparison thing, obviously, not helpful. I also think about just social media is such a sedentary act. You talk about action. I'm typically sitting, head down, totally disconnected from anything in the present moment. Uh, that's a problem. It's probably why like podcasts are so much better because it allows us to be act out there. Like I could be on a
Yeah,
walk
moving.
listening to a podcast. I could be so like just the getting action into our lives and knowing that something like social media is really moves me into this sedentary state. And so again, so much of high performance, it's not complicated and you got to jump through all these hoops, but you do have to identify some of the basics that work against your high performance. I'll give you a really good example. I go to bed at 9 o'clock every night. Now, that's a basic thing, but 8 hours of sleep, I've found that if I have 8 hours of sleep, I operate at a much higher performance than on 5 or 6 hours of sleep. It's a basic thing. I don't have to pay $30,000 to have this thing added to my life. I don't have to get an education and sleep. I just have to go to bed at 9 o'clock. Sometimes we just make this transformation stuff way too hard. It's like sleep, hydrate, eat good food, exercise. If you do those four things, you're about 80% there.
Yeah, and add in a little real connection, not fake connection with the social
Yes,
media.
there you
And
go.
now,
Yes.
like, I wear a Whoop, and what's funny is I've noticed that when I'm around family and friends, people that I really enjoy, my recovery is so much stronger. So
Yeah.
it's the energy that I'm receiving from the people around me on top of the sleeping well. I've been traveling a lot lately, and the hardest thing to do when you're changing time zones is to get on the schedule. And I've been
Mhm.
trying to fight with, do I stay on East Coast time or do I adjust to the new time? And I have not found the solution yet. So for the listeners, if you're listening and you have solutions on YouTube or on the podcast, go ahead and put your best examples in, because I'm always trying to hack that. You make me think it's almost like, first of all, simplifying is always the answer. And if you think about, like, I think it was Michael Gerber's book, The E Myth, right? If you
Mhm.
think of the E Myth for life, the E Myth of like, it's all about like, what are the things we can scale and replicate and do simply, not the things that complicate, that become extra tasks that add employees and people and
Yes.
complexity in areas that we don't need. And that's really, I think, the stress that we're talking about, to bring it back to social media or whatever it may be, the stress that we put on ourselves to disconnect like that, like we've earned it, is definitely something that everybody can relate to and could do a little less. And
I
sleep will
agree.
be the easiest way to exit.
Yes. Could not
That's
agree more.
awesome. So I really love the conversation that I heard you having about, um, you know, children and trauma and the connectivity to kind of how they view success. And I just want to
Mhm.
dive deep into that for a few minutes, just because I feel like so many people spend so much time looking back on their lives, and some never get away from it. Some kind of stay blaming their parents for everything that went wrong, or, maybe their dad was too hard on them, or their mom was too judgy in what they wore, how they looked. And then they grow up and then they replicate it all over again with their own families or their own kids. And their level of success has been created by some of these challenges that they were experiencing. You've done a lot of work in this area, and I find it so fascinating. What part of this conversation is most interesting to you today, and what do you find coming up all the time? Like, I feel like this has to come up on a regular basis where you're coaching.
Yeah, to me, like when I'm coaching a client and working with somebody, it's always about understanding the core driver and really the need that's trying to be met here. And you mentioned kind of trauma and early childhood stuff. Uh, the primal question is really a question that gets imprinted in us in our early childhood. And it really represents a need that went unmet or that was confusing about how to actually meet that need. And so what happens is, let's take the primal question. It's primal question number 5. Am I successful? Let's say, and typically the imprint here is you grow up in a competitive home, a home where there's like a scoreboard, and whether that's through sports or grades, but there's always sort of this mom and dad caretakers are really paying attention to the numbers and how well Scott's doing. Okay. So there's sort of this pressure to now be successful because there's a question. Am I successful? Because it feels like even when I win, I should be doing more. Okay. Or, the way that I get mom and dad's attention and love is to make sure that I don't fail. Okay. So we get all of this messaging, and we basically, what happens is we take what I call kid logic that I write about in the book, are kid logic strategies for success, and then bring them into our adult lives. And and what happens is the question, am I successful, gets imprinted in your early childhood, but then now as an adult, you are continuing to ask that question, am I successful? And when you get a yes to that question, life is good. Scott's good. We're feeling great. We're feeling like this is what we were created to do. But when Scott gets a no or a maybe to that primal question of am I successful, Scott goes into a scramble. And the scramble is all the coping mechanisms and dysfunctional ways and that those kid logic strategies that we use to try to force the answer back to a yes. So it's all the different ways you have figured out how to be successful and force it back to a yes so that life can be good. But the problem here, Scott, with all of us is, number one, this question is so profound. It is the thing underneath thing that drives everything. It is so important, this primal question, that your relationships are defined by it, your work is defined by it, your identity is defined by it, your parenting is defined by it. And so, if we don't understand that driver or that question and how it's influencing our lives, we're living at a massive disadvantage. And so, when I'm working with clients, it's helping them understand what is the question that is driving your life and moving it from a question to what I call a statement. And it's called what the primal truth, where we take our question, am I successful? And that's question 5. There's 6 others. Am I successful becomes I am
Yeah.
successful. And what a different energy, you talk about energy, what a different energy that brings to our day and to our relationships when we're no longer asking the question, am I successful? And we're living in the truth, I am successful. We're no longer using kids' strategies to try to force the answer to a yes. And we just realize like we already have a yes. There's no need to like go out and get more. And now we can actually give our success and our talents and our gifts away freely without needing a yes back. I don't need you, Scott, to tell me I'm successful because I already feel successful. I already know I'm successful. I have enough data proving I'm successful. So this just allows our relationship to be very different. I don't need anything from you. I don't need your validation. I don't need your scorekeeping. I don't need to compare myself to you. We just get to freely interact. And what a wholly new way to live in the world.
Yeah, it's really interesting because when I think about my childhood, it was extremely competitive. And everything from coloring, everything was a contest. And
Yes.
my dad is a results oriented individual, and so it's
Mhm.
all comes from a good spot. For the very
Yep.
things that we became, I would not be who I am today. I would not be where I'm at today. I would not feel potentially as successful as I do today had I not been built in this manner. But I also learned to shift from am I to I am. And I think
Right.
that's the key component. And I think in my book, I talk about coming home and starting in the financial services industry and making 6 figures for the first time. And I knew at the time that that was a really big deal. And money becomes really small and easy to talk about when you work in money, but when you don't work in money, it's, like, really uncomfortable, and I remember sitting at the dinner table, and we do Sunday night dinner all the time, and I'm in my 20s, and I'm doing really well, and I can't wait to tell my dad. I can't wait, like, I wanna tell everyone at the dinner table, and I remember, something was said that immediately I was like, "This is not the place, and this is not what you're doing this for." And it's not about the money, it's not about it was the accomplishment that I was willing to share, but it was that competitive style lifestyle that I had grown up with where I was still seeking that affirmation, and
Yeah,
it
you're
was a
seeking that
clean
yes.
yeah, it was a clean shift. I remember going, "Who are you doing this for?" It
Mhm.
just that day, and I was disappointed I didn't get to share it. And, years later, my mom was closing a loan for me and saw something on the sheet of earning, and she called me and was all embarrassed and was like, "I don't know if I should be looking at this, and I don't know." And I remember a small part of me felt good that that one of the 2 of them actually knew there was some level, just a very primal, old school feeling. There was a feeling of saying, I'm glad I don't have to hide it. Like I that
Right.
there's because I felt like I actually had to hide it because it was almost hurting the relationships more than it was helping at that time. And again, it doesn't have to be so substantial or so crazy. It's just the sheer why am I doing this? And that shift was crucial. And I love the primal question of am I loved? And shifting
Mhm.
it to I am loved because
Yes.
so many people struggle in relationships and it goes to the same thing as success. Until we love ourselves and feel loved, we can't truly ask someone else to give us something we're not doing for ourselves. So I love how you define it in these areas. And personally, I could just see myself in that and seeing myself. And so as I was reading through these, just some of these changes I remember making as early as in my 20s that were life-changing and, crazy.
I love that. One of the things that's uh, was really exciting about the research, and when I say research, was 5 years of research, 6,000 hours of one-on-one interviews, 22 group labs, 32,000 assessments to come up with this framework. And one of the most exciting things when we're talking about high performance, and I'm sure Scott, you experience this in your life, is that what we do is we take our primal question, so your primal question of am I successful? And what we do is we place it over everybody else and assume that they are asking the exact same question. Now, there's 6 other questions that they could be asking in terms of their primal question. But Scott, your interaction with everybody is going to be you taking your primal question, am I successful, and putting it over everybody else. And then having the gift or the superpower or the strength of affirming that with that question with a yes over other people. So your whole orientation in relationship is about you helping people be successful. You want them to feel a yes from you, okay? And you're probably great at coaching people, helping people level up. You're probably great at challenging people in terms of, hey, you can do more here.
Right.
And I wonder in just some of that interaction with your mom and dad that maybe some of the check that you had in your spirit about not sharing that was, would me sharing this with my mom or dad, again, your questions over them, and by the way, your dad's question might be, am I successful, just the way he showed up, but in you sharing about how much you made, would that be a possible no or a maybe to them? Okay, so you're making them feel less successful by sharing that piece of data. Again, all of this idea of that core driver impacts and seeps into everything we do. And so it's not only the thing that we need to manage in ourselves, but it's also this incredible gift. But it's also something that, causes us to create a little bit of tension in relationships because we don't know what to do with it. Like, I you may not share about your income level because you may be doing the calculation, if I do, that will make other people feel less successful than I am, which goes against the very core of your being. Your whole reason for existence is to help people be successful. And so again, how this shows up in our lives in all these random and unique ways, it's really important that we pay attention to these core drivers.
It's all interconnected. I mean, if you think back to
All in.
competition and I look at relationships, winning is everything. I still hate losing today. I do not like losing in anything. I
Sure.
couldn't play a board game when I was a kid because we'd be blowing up the board game, if it wasn't going, if I couldn't control the result, it was very difficult. And so winning in a relationship, think of having a normal everyday disagreement and somebody that thinks
Mhm.
so far in the future, so visionary, that feels like losing, and losing can be 10x if you keep losing, and so you have to make an adjustment or a change. And so just, to your point, just being more comfortable living in the present, like just actually accepting things for how they are. There's so many changes that happen throughout life, and you're right, when you talk about income in that moment, I felt like it was going to hurt somebody, and I actually felt like it was an ego thing and I was embarrassed. And I
Mhm.
remember feeling like that was the first time I'd been working so hard for it that I wanted to share, but it had nothing to do with hurting or the number. It was more just achieving a goal, putting your
Well,
mind to it and achieving a goal, if that makes sense.
yeah, it does. I mean, it basically what you were wanting was your mom and dad to say yes to your primal question of, am I successful? Mom and dad, let me share how much money I made. And I know if I share that with you, I should get a yes. But the problem is you weren't sure that you were going to get a yes. You actually were thinking about how this might create a problem, and you actually didn't want a problem or a conflict with your parents. But what you were wanting was a yes to your primal question of, am I successful, from your mom and dad. It's as
Right.
simple as that. But then it got really complicated because now we're kind of in our scramble around it. And instead of just kind of living in the truth of knowing, again, the statement, I am successful, so I don't actually need a yes from my mom and dad, and I could just freely share whatever I want. It's just, again, a very different way to
It's
show
powerful.
up to that moment.
Yeah. It's interesting. I remember my son, we had to hold him back in kindergarten. Uh he had to have eye therapy, and I don't remember, my wife knows knows the term of what it is, and I don't get into the weeds on that type of stuff. I know that he could not read the words. They were blurring together. He went to a year's worth of intensive eye therapy. It literally was amazing. His discipline, his drive, it's been a key differentiator in his entire life and all the decisions he's made from this small moment of 5 to 6 years old and holding him back in kindergarten to repeat. And I remember Dr. Westcott was the doctor that did it, and I was so grateful to him in watching my son's success. But my wife and I were so proud of our son, and we're like, "We're so proud
Mm,
of you." And Dr. Westcott interrupted us and was like, um, "Braden, you did this. You should be proud of yourself. You
mm,
accomplished this." He shifted the whole thought process, and it was something that was, again, these aha moments happen in your life where, you're trying to show up for your children the way that maybe you felt someone might have needed to show up a little bit more to you. And so you're giving them that hey, we were so you're so amazing, like blah blah blah. And Dr. Westcott just flipped it and was like, do you feel happy that you did this? Do you feel joy that you succeeded? Do you see what you did? Look at what you did. This was the first writing you did. This is the last writing you did. This is 1 year, Braden, and he was completely changing. And that's something that I've tried. My wife and I both have tried really hard in parenting our sons, who are both very successful, and they will define their own level of success, but in them feeling successful at what they were doing and not being defined by our viewpoint on it. Even if we
yeah.
inadvertently still have the silent car ride occasionally that happened when we were parenting, I definitely was not the best at that. I do not like losing. And so even if I didn't lose, I was still the guy that was like, I couldn't hide it. You're passionate. And then you listen to this and you're like, oh man, if I could have only just been better. But we grow, and that's part of the process.
Well, I think one of the most interesting applications of the primal question is in our parenting. Again, the whole point of we take our own primal question and we place it over everybody else and assume they're asking the same question. We do that in parenting. The problem with parenting is we tend to take our primal question. Again, if your primal question is, "Am I successful?" or there's perhaps it could be, "Am I good enough?" or "Am I loved?" or "Am I safe?" Whatever your primal question is, you tend to parent to that question. And so my primal question is not, am I successful? My primal question actually is, am I safe? Which is question number one. So the way that I parented was through the lens of safety, not success. I made sure that my kids were protected and safe. And where are you going? And what time will you be home? I still tell my 25-year-old son today, like the last thing I say to him when he gets in his car and drives away is drive safe. Like everything is around safety. And what the problem is, we tend to over index on our question. So Scott in his parenting might have the tendency to over index on success with his kids and his kids being successful. Mike Foster will over index on safety. And so, again, it's just an awareness thing, knowing like, okay, we're doing this and let's bring it back to a healthy level and a healthier conversation around safety and success. I always tell parents, I say, good parenting means we're answering all seven primal questions, not just our own for our kids.
Yeah. I think the other thing about good parenting is we have to be going back to our original conversation about self-awareness. We have to be aware of these imperfections. And when they show up, we just have to admit that we made a mistake. It doesn't
Yes.
matter how old your children are. It really helped to be able to admit mistakes. And my boys learned a lot from me failing. not just from me
Mhm.
trying to be the best version of myself, but failing and then saying, hey, you know what? Let me tell you, I'm sorry. And let me tell you where this comes from so you can learn from this because this is, I don't know if I've defined yet what my primal question is because I think a lot of my success came from security and safety.
Mm.
It was
Mhm.
feeling like I had to provide and protect for everyone. So it was more of like uh an
A
area of,
resource thing.
yeah, it was a resource, a protection, if you will.
Mhm.
What mine was never like, am I safe? Like, drive safe. I don't worry about things like that, but I definitely, um, security was really, really important. Freedom to me was being secure and knowing that we could do things. Like, nothing was worse than going to wanting to go to France and, going to the meetup where you're in French class and the kids are going to go to France, knowing that we can't go because I'm never going to be able to afford it, and just thinking like I couldn't solve those equations and going, well, what if we
Wow.
did this and how if we did how do so the success portion was more about creating a secure environment for everyone around, and that wasn't just financially, that was also driven by security of being in a safe neighborhood. And, all those things
Mm.
are tied together. So it's
That's really good, Scott. You're doing what I'd say is like you're doing really, really good work because, again, there's several of the 7 questions are we can all relate to them at some level, like they're because they're core human needs. But what you're drilling into is the actual why. Why did you want to be successful? Because you associated success with security. And that's really question 2, am I secure, which has to do with financial resource. Do I have enough? I have a client that I wrote about in the book. He flies in on his $30 million jet. It's worth about $500 million, 10,000 employees, and he's still asking the question, am I secure? Do I have enough? Now, he grew up in a home where there wasn't enough. There was an early childhood imprint of scarcity. And so he has designed a life, a quote unquote successful life, but for the sole purpose of having enough resource. And that's what we're talking about here, Scott, is like it, looking at things say kind of on face value. Okay, it's about is it a success conversation we need to be having, Scott, or is it a security conversation that we need to be having? And that's the difference of like sort of blurry understanding about what motivates us and our core drivers and HD clarity. And when we have that HD clarity, man, everything pops, everything makes sense, and now I'm empowered to make healthier decisions in my life versus sort of assuming this might be about success when really it's about security.
Yeah. And what's funny is it also, as I was reading through your materials and learning, I thought about the one thing that I never felt a problem with, and that was whether or not I was loved. And I
Mm,
think as a parent, I still think the Beatles had it down pat. Love is all you need. If you get down to one thing, you can fail at a lot of things, but if you feel loved, you can be confident, you can be empowered, you can find
mm.
ways to develop and grow. You can feel connection with people to learn from each other. And I think the fact that you grow up in a loved home and you still are imperfect provides such a strong foundation for some of the other challenges or questions. And I don't know if you have a fundamental opinion, like, is one of the 7 primal questions more important to success in life? And when I say success in life, I mean just being a good human, just feeling like you belong. Or if they're not interconnected with each other in some capacity.
Yeah, again, the thesis of the framework is that it comes back to early child imprint, where a question or a need went unmet, or a question went answered with a no or a maybe, and there's confusion. And so, kind of the way the model works is it breaks up all the 7 questions into kind of 3 categories of need. And so, like the first core, question 1 and 2, am I safe? Am I secure? Kind of the core need there for an individual would be power and control. Okay, that's basically what you're wanting. You're wanting power control, the ability to choose, to be, not to be trapped, not to be stuck. Okay. Those feel like no's to your question of, am I safe or am I secure? The second category, and that the power and control tends to live like in the domain of the mind. The second need would be the need to be known and connected, which really lives in the domain of relationships. And that would be question 3 and 4. Am I loved and am I wanted? And then the third category of need would be the need for recognition and achievement, which really lives in the domain of performance. And that would cover question 5, am I successful? Question 6, am I good enough? And question 7, do I have purpose? And so all the questions really, it's not that one is more
Right.
better than the other or more foundational. What's important to understand is, what is the need that when it gets met with a no or a maybe, that sends you into your scramble? What is the need that is ultimately defining your life? Like, I got to be real honest. Like, I want to be loved, but if I'm not loved, Scott, that's okay, because safety is the thing that I want the most. Okay.
Yeah.
And so in some ways, like whatever our primal question is, it somewhat inoculates us to some of those other needs. Like, I really don't care about having a life of purpose. Be nice to have, but I don't have to have a life of purpose, which is question 7. I just want to be safe. And so getting really clear on the driving need that you have is probably the most important thing, though, to be honest with you. Obviously, love and these sorts and all the things that love represents, to me, it's like I would probably represent love as safety. You want to love me well, help me feel
Sa-
safe.
yeah.
Okay. You want to, for a Q5 whose primal question is, am I successful? You want to love them well, help them be successful.
Yeah, it's great, and it's also about the person that you're trying to help, not yourself, but there is a primal need internally. Does your safety come from something that happened in childhood? Is that a something that you built out of not feeling safe, and then you had to build off of that throughout your life?
Yeah, the imprint for me was very straightforward, trauma. And my story, and I wrote about it in the book, is my parents used to take me over to a family friend's house when they would go away and do these kind of overnight vacations, as my mom and dad would often do. And this trusted friend would abuse me when I was over at their house. And so basically there's pretty significant trauma around in my early childhood, and I just never felt safe. Like, I'm going to get hurt. I am not protected here. And so what we all do in these moments of when a need is going unmet, the need for safety for me, the need for love for somebody else, the need to be successful for somebody else, but for me, safety, I then, as a child, figure out 1,000 different ways to make myself safe. Okay. And so the way that I figured out how to make myself safe, and again, this is the kid logic or the scramble part that we're talking about, is through hypervigilance and hyper control. If I could know everything, know, predict everything that might happen, get all the information, then I'll always be safe. Well, that makes sense for a kid. That doesn't make sense in an adult life. There's lots of things that I'm just not going to be able to figure out or predict. But that doesn't mean that I'm not safe. And
Right.
that's the thing of living in this primal truth, is too often we're forgetting the realities that, well, I'm 6'4", 210 pounds, and I live in a suburb of San Diego. I'm safe.
You're safe.
Okay.
Yeah. Exactly. It's funny, it's not funny, but I share in some of, that feeling, in that I grew up and had a early childhood. There was a break-in and a babysitter and a sexual assault,
Mm.
and I was a witness and a part of it, and I was very young, and I think the challenge, I didn't really realize the impact that this had on my life till I started writing my book, and I started going back through all the challenges that I felt. And, it's almost like therapy. You go back through this stuff and you're like, oh, I never felt safe and secure. I definitely
Mhm.
had to have that vigilant control and the awareness. I mean, I'm in a visionary role in almost everything that I do successfully. I'm using air quotes for those of you listening, but what I tend to do well is seeing things before other people see them because I had
Yes.
to protect myself
Yeah.
and
That's right.
when someone breaks into your home as a 3-year-old and the person that's watching you is, you know, very hurt in a horrible way, right? You immediately lose all groundwork for safety, even with your family. Like there's no level of safety that can be. You have to rebuild it over time. And the cool thing is that mentally you kind of start and people that coach others like you, Mike, that are doing amazing things on your social media platform with your 7 primal questions, those traumatic experiences allowed you to teach yourself some things, to learn about yourself in ways of depth that just are impossible for other people to see or maybe even understand without having had that experience. And so you're turning something you don't have to search for a life of purpose. You've had it from the time that you were young. And so it's
That's right.
powerful and you see that in the work that you do and the ability to connect with people who have both been through this and not been through this. And so I completely relate and understand. And mine probably comes from security then. If I think about it, it's control and security. And so I
Mhm.
probably, and the financial stuff was just another level of feeling like I was protecting everybody. So,
Yes.
super interesting, but I couldn't relate more and understand that, and I love to see that you turned, challenges into opportunities to help so many people, and the research is just awesome. Everybody should pick up the 7 primal questions. I brought it with me to Chicago, and if you know anything about me traveling, I travel quite light, and so I brought the actual book because I want you to see that I bought it for you, so that's a affirmation, for you, but, no, I just appreciate you investing your time in our listeners, in us today. I think everybody should follow you, everybody can learn from you, and I love what you're doing, Mike. Any other how do people find you? What's the next thing you're working on? What can you share with our listeners so they can be more in the Mike Foster journey?
Yeah, probably the simplest next step, Scott, is we have a free assessment at primalquestion.com. Takes about 5 minutes, and your listeners can go there, take the assessment, and actually discover and learn their primal question. And then you'll get some resources and some tools specifically towards your primal question and your results. It's just it's the best place to start. Like, what is my primal question? What is the thing underneath the thing that drives everything for me? And then the website has a lot of great resources on there. The book, obviously, on Amazon. But really, I would say go find out what your question is as the beginning place of this incredible journey about better understanding yourself, but also understanding that primal gift and also how to live much more in your primal truth, knowing that whatever your question is, it can live in a statement and no longer be have to live in a question. Like, Scott, you can know that you're secure. Mike, you can know that you're safe. Whatever the question is, we can really be live such more empowered lives and lives that are contributing something really amazing and beautiful to other people because we're not trying to get something back from them. I don't need yeses for safety anymore because I am safe. Scott, you don't need yeses for your security anymore because you
Right.
are secure. It just gives us a whole new opportunity to love and bless the people that we're around at a whole new level. And that's what I would say is the meta high performance, the next level of high performance, where we're not playing that old game anymore, and we're just in this exciting new world.
We're killing the kid logic and using our adult brains to logically think and work through the challenges that we experienced. Mike, it's been an honor to have you on the show. It's awesome. We'll send out your website in our email. So if you're not on our email list, go to scottdanner.com and get on the email list so that when we release these shows, we'll have things like this as a sidebar. We'll make sure we put your information out there and we release it. And if not, go to his website right away if you're listening to this, and that way we can all learn our true primal question. So, Mike, thanks again for joining me. I hope you enjoyed this podcast. If you liked it, there's more where this one came from. Click here and enjoy some more.